Chapter 81. A Failed King. Within weeks, Stannis had managed to gain the support of the majority of the lords in the Stormlands. His victory over his brother's army proved just how capable of a commander he was. It was human instinct to want to follow a man who could win, and in his lifetime Stannis had won numerous famous battles. By the end of the month, ravens had flown to all corners of Westeros bearing the news that Storm's End had fallen. Renly had fled back to Highgarden, and Stannis Baratheon now ruled the Stormlands. Some said it was sorcery, others disciplined, but it didn't matter. He had proven himself and gained a lot of support for it. Margaery Tyrell remained a prisoner, though treated with respect. She was allowed maids and fine clothes, and though her movements were limited, she was given the comforts of a lady. Her family would come for her, but when and how was uncertain. Stannis had already begun writing terms to House Tyrell. They could bend the knee, recognize him as king, and retain their holdings, or they could be branded enemies of the realm and face his sword. He wasn't bluffing, as the Tyrells had seen what he did to his own brother's army. In Highgarden, Renly had just arrived back alongside a few hundred soldiers who managed to flee the battle as well. Lord Mace Tyrell came to greet Renly as the Hand of the King. "Your Grace," he greeted as he bowed. "I am glad that you returned safely to Highgarden." Renly dismounted with the help of a guard, his armor still dented and covered with mud and blood. His cloak was torn, his pride even more so. "We lost everything, Mace," he muttered. "The field, the men, the momentum. Stannis crushed us." Mace Tyrell, dressed in rich green velvet with golden chains, gave his son-in-law a concerned frown but quickly hid it behind a forced smile. "Losses can be recovered. Highgarden is still behind you. The Reach is still behind you." But not all in the Reach shared his optimism. Inside the hall of Highgarden, Lady Olenna Tyrell waited with her usual sharpness. When Renly entered, she rose from her seat. "So," she said, "the would-be king comes home without a crown or an army. Just smoke, shame, and a wounded ego." Renly stiffened but didn't respond. He knew better than to try his wits with the Queen of Thorns. Mace chuckled awkwardly, trying to ease the tension. "Mother, please. The man's just returned from battle." "A battle he started," Olenna said, "and couldn't finish." She walked toward Renly, circling him like a hawk sizing up wounded prey. "You had every advantage. Men, money, lords, my granddaughter. And what did you do with it? You charged into a trap like a fool." After all that, Renly finally spoke. "I was betrayed. Stannis had help, Sellswords from Essos mercenaries. He struck when we weren't ready." Renly was telling a lie, as nobody present was on the field with him. Olenna raised an eyebrow. "A king should always be ready, and if he's not, he shouldn't wear a crown." Mace looked between them, his mouth opening to interject, but Olenna waved him off. "We put our name, our gold, and our daughter behind you, and now Margaery is a prisoner. Tell me, Renly, how does it feel knowing your queen is being held by your enemy while you sulk in the gardens?" "I will get her back," Renly said, clenching his teeth, "and I will retake what is rightfully mine." Olenna snorted. "Not with dreams and pride. We need strategy and options." She turned back toward her seat and gestured for her maids to bring wine. "It's clear now you are not the one to win this war. You've shown promise but not results. The realm will not bend to charm alone." Mace hesitated. "Mother, what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Olenna said, pouring herself a cup, "that we stop putting all our apples in a bruised basket. Stannis may have won a field, but he's still not loved. The North has risen. Eddard Stark lives, and there are whispers of imperial support in their ranks." Mace frowned. "You mean to ally with the Starks?" "Not yet," she replied, "but it would be wise to make inquiries. And as for Margaery, if Renly cannot secure her return through war, then we will secure her through diplomacy or trade." She sipped her wine. "This war is about positioning, and our position must shift." Renly watched Olenna, not sure if she meant what she said. "You'd cast me aside just like that?" "I would," Olenna said, without hesitation, "if it means protecting this house. And you should thank me for it." Renly didn't know what to say. He had lost thousands of soldiers, and now Stannis had an advantage over him. He would need a lot more soldiers in order to win. That's when a thought crossed his mind. He wondered if he could convince the Dorne to help him in exchange for recognizing their independence. Would they send soldiers to support him? Back in the north, things were also changing. Robb Stark now shared command with his father, Eddard. The lords of the north had always respected Robb for his bravery and resolve, but Eddard's return brought strategy, experience, and the weight of old oaths. Together, they had rallied the river lords and strengthened their positions along the Trident. With the support of Imperial-supplied siege engineers and new tactics, they had established a strong presence in the region. The Lannisters, for all their gold, were losing ground. At Harrenhal, Tywin Lannister's patience was thinning. His army was large but stretched. Raiders hit supply lines. His outriders vanished into woods and never returned. He was facing more than just the Northerners. He was facing a new kind of war. "The boy king has his wolves," Tywin muttered to Kevan over a map of the Riverlands. "But the wolves have learned new tricks." Kevan nodded grimly. "If the Imperials are helping the Starks, we're not just fighting a rebellion," he stated. "And if we lose here," Tywin said, "then the lions of Casterly Rock will be remembered as the prey." The meeting lasted a while as they made their next move. Meanwhile, Robb had found himself increasingly drawn to a young noblewoman named Jane Westerling, the daughter of Gon Westerling from the crag located in the Westerlands, who had joined the northern host after tending wounded at the Battle of Riverrun. She was nothing like the courtly Frey daughters. She spoke plainly, carried a dagger, and once stitched a wound on Robb's arm herself. The love grew quickly and soon dangerously. Catelyn returned from her failed mission to Renly to find her son in love, already speaking of marriage. When she reminded him of his betrothal to a Frey, Robb was defiant. "They will understand," he said. His father reminded him that a marriage should not be broken so easily, especially when their position was so strong at the moment. "I've made my decision," he said. "I won't become a slave to the whims of Walder Frey." Eddard sighed, the weight of his son's statement touching his heart. His son's happiness was paramount to him, but so was his life and the lives of the soldiers following him into battle. "You've always been strong-willed," Eddard said, "and that has made you a great leader. But a great leader also needs to make sacrifices for the good of his people." Robb looked at his father and nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Yet his heart yearned for Jane. The decision was not an easy one to make, and Robb spent the night deep in thought, weighing his duty against his love. In the end, he decided to go through with his marriage to Walder Frey's daughter, but that didn't stop him from spending as much as he could with Jane. The spies that Walder Frey had in the Northern Army had informed him of what Robb was doing, and this did not sit well with him. He was an old man, shrewd and suspicious. The whispers about Robb and this Westerling girl made him trust the Starks even less than he already did. He didn't trust them entirely, and he trusted young lords in love even less. Back at Casterly Rock, Tywin had been informed of Robb's philandering by his own spies. He saw it as an opportunity and had quickly devised a plan to turn this situation to their advantage. "We will use this chance to sow discord," he told his brother Kevan. "We'll feed the Freys information that Robb Stark has no intention of honoring his oath." Kevan raised his brows. "But it's mere speculation," he argued. Tywin stared back at him as he responded. "Some men are born with a taste for power and others with a taste for gold," he began. "Walder Frey has both in equal measure. Fear of losing those precious things will make him act impulsively." Kevan understood but still had doubts. Tywin moved forward with the plan and began to try and get Walder Frey on their side. If he could, then he would be able to end this northern rebellion and go defeat Stannis to end another. In the Eyrie, a large number of lords and ladies from both the Vale and Dorne gathered to celebrate the marriage of Artys Arryn and Aegon Targaryen. Surprisingly, the two sides got along well, though Maximus figured that it might be because he was present, and they were scared to cause problems. As he was sitting down at his table with Arianne sitting on his lap, a Shadowhand agent had whispered in his ear about the plans being made by Tywin Lannister and the risk it posed to the northern cause. Maximus nodded his head. "Since I'm here, I'll deal with it myself. Just keep watching them and make sure that no member of the Stark family dies." The Shadowhand agent nodded and disappeared to continue carrying out his assignment. Chapter 82: Breaking the Red Wedding. Cersei slammed her fists on the table as she read the piece of paper in front of her. The betrothal between House Arryn and House Martell had gone through, and there was nothing she could have done about it. When Littlefinger returned after failing his task so quickly, Joffrey threw him in a cell and called him incompetent. She tried to tell Joffrey not to be too quick at making such decisions, but he ignored her. She had already lost control of him, and there was nothing she could do to regain that control. Joffrey had already started mounting the heads of enemies outside of the Red Keep as trophies and a warning to anybody who would disobey him. Tyrion was putting him in his place here and there, but that didn't sit well with Cersei, as she despised the little monster, as she calls him. She couldn't wait until her father came to take his place as the Hand, and Tyrion gets cast aside like he deserves, though she would much rather cast him into the ocean and watch him struggle to survive. That aside, they were beginning to lose support as they had lost the Dorne and the Vale to the Imperials, who had a rather good reputation among the common folk. If they didn't start eliminating their enemies, then they would be at war forever, eventually killed by their enemies. In the Tower of the Hand, Tyrion had taken a sip from his wine as he sorted through all sorts of documents that bored him out of his mind. At first, he didn't know how to react when he was appointed as the acting Hand, but as time passed, he enjoyed the power that he had. He had some good men under him as well. Bronn, his trusted sellsword, was now commanding the city's watch and doing a rather commendable job of it. Varys continued to serve the role he had for decades, but had made the decision to help Tyrion out only because the two of them were similar in how people perceived them. Varys had already been contemplating his role as the Master of Whispers because he, alongside many others, could see where the war was headed. First it was Dorne, now it was the Vale. How long until it was the entire continent, and he would be stuck serving the wrong side? Varys didn't want to remain in a losing position, which was why he planned to observe how the war between House Lannister, Stannis Baratheon, and Robb Stark progresses before making a decision on what he would do. He respected Ned Stark and knew that his son was well educated in the Imperial Union. So, his best bet was either to support them or switch sides and work under the Emperor. Even if he didn't switch sides, he knew that Tyrion would forgive him for any betrayal he might commit. At the black cells of the Red Keep, Littlefinger stood looking rather annoyed at his current situation. He didn't expect such a reaction from them tossing him into a cell, rather than letting him scheme up something to turn this failure into a success. He had spoken with Tyrion on the matter and thought they came to an understanding. But as the day went on, it seemed like they had forgotten about him. Even more so when news of Renly's defeat had reached King's Landing. Renly's defeat made Joffrey angry at the council for their incompetence and allowed Tyrion to convince him that Littlefinger could yet prove useful. Tyrion knew better than anyone that Littlefinger was always useful, especially when there is chaos and opportunity to be found. After releasing him from the cells, Tyrion invited Littlefinger to his office, where the man looked defeated but not broken. Tyrion could tell that there was a lot more he could do before his ambition was truly snuffed out. In that regard, they were similar men, dismissed by those around them, looked down upon for things beyond their control. "You took your time," Littlefinger said as he entered. Tyrion smirked. "Did I? I thought a night's stay would give you some time to consider your next contribution to the crown." Littlefinger raised a brow. "I suppose Stannis' victory has sped things up in the city." Tyrion poured himself another glass of wine and gestured for Littlefinger to take a seat. "The Stormlands are his, and now we have other concerns. But you did well making it back so quickly." Littlefinger sat down and tried not to show relief. Instead, he leaned back and pretended to be confident. "Quick enough to still be of use?" Tyrion nodded. "You'll find Joffrey has no patience for failure, but my father sees value in a man who knows when to cut his losses and strike anew." Littlefinger remained silent as Tyrion continued. "We have rumors of Robb Stark's carnal adventures with this Westerling girl. A marriage broken before they even marched south. My father will want to fan that fire, and what better man than one who knows how to breathe on kindling?" Littlefinger, sensing the chance at redemption, leaned forward. "Perhaps I can rouse Lord Frey with a few select words." Tyrion smiled again. "I was certain you'd volunteer. This time, bring it back in writing." Littlefinger rose and adjusted his coat, already plotting his next move. "It seems the crown's favors are more fleeting than usual." Tyrion moved to pour him a drink but stopped as he saw Littlefinger already on his way out of his office. "They are," Tyrion said quietly to himself. "But some favors are more persistent than others." Cersei, hearing of this development, was not pleased but knew that if anyone could manipulate those crusty old fools at the Twins, it would be Littlefinger. And if he couldn't, well, then she might give it one tries her way by sending them an assassin or two. Tyrion had sent a raven to his father telling him the plan he had come up with. Tywin, knowing how useful Littlefinger was, agreed to the proposal. He sent a raven to the Freys using their current situation to manipulate them into planning a red wedding to get rid of the Starks all at once. He also got Lord Bolton in on this plan too and offered him the title of Warden of the North in exchange. A day later, Lord Frey replied and expressed interest but also concerns about such a plan. He wanted insurance from the crown that they would not suffer from such an incident. If he got the insurance and protection, then he would not hesitate to switch sides and get back at the Starks. Roose Bolton had also agreed with the promise of Warden of the North. Over the next 2 months, talks and schemes had gone through while the wedding between Robb Stark and Rosalind Frey. Once the day came, the Lords of the North and their allies had gathered in the Twins to host the wedding. The Lords sat down and watched the marriage between Robb Stark and Rosalind Frey. After they were wed, the highborn nobles feasted, while knights, lesser lords, and bastards ate in the opposing castle. Common soldiers celebrated in the tents outside. During the wedding, Robb danced with a number of Frey women, including his newlywed wife, Rosalind, Alex, Fair Valda, Lady Joyeuse, Ami, Fat Valda, Sarah, Shure, and Daisy Mormont. Several poor dishes are served, the most appetizing being pink lamb. Before Robb and Rosalind departed for the bedding custom, the doors to the hall were shut close, which caught the attention of Lady Catelyn. Next, they started playing the Rains of Castamere, a song associated with Lord Tywin Lannister. This caused her to look around as Lord Walder Frey raised his hand, causing everybody to take their seats. Catelyn sat next to Ned while Robb was directly in front of Lord Walder Frey. "Your Grace," he began. "My honored guests." He turned to the gathered lords. "Be welcome. The Red." He couldn't get the next words out as somebody opened the doors of the hall and stormed in. "My lords, there are dragons outside," he reported. The lords in the hall didn't know why dragons were here, so they all got up and ran outside to see what was going. Hovering above the castle, Maximus alongside Hera, and a few dozen Imperial guards had arrived at the wedding for a surprised visit. The armies of the North and their allies had armed themselves, though many didn't know what they could do against the dragons besides shoot arrows. The lords had left the entrance of the castle and looked up to see a massive dragon followed by several small dragons hovering in the night sky. Nyxera had flew a little low, allowing Maximus to jump off her back and land on the ground right in front of all the gathered lords. The guards had taken out their weapons, ready to fight if necessary, while Ned Stark had reached the front and bowed his head. "Your Excellency, it's good to see you again," he stated. Sansa and Arya had also come forward and greeted him, followed by the rest of the lords. They all bowed respectfully, surprised to see the Emperor himself arriving at the Twins. Robb rushed outside and moved to greet him. "Your Excellency," he said. "We didn't expect you. It's an honor." Robb was shocked just like everyone else. Maximus looked around, seeing all of the faces gathered. "It's an important day for the Starks and the North, and I was just a short distance away, so I thought it appropriate to attend." Lord Frey had come forward as well with a few of his kin. Though he was caught off guard, being a man who covered all his bases, he quickly adapted to this current situation and acted like nothing was wrong in hopes that Maximus wouldn't stay long. "You came at perfect time, Your Excellency." He shifted into a smile. "Though it's a bit of surprise, you know how us old men are with surprises, especially when they don't go according to plan," Maximus said flatly, causing Walder Frey's expression to change from thrilled to annoyed in an instant. He didn't know if Maximus knew what he had planned or if he was just trying to flex his empire's might. Regardless, he would still make sure that this would go on smoothly without anybody knowing prior knowledge about what he had planned. "We welcome you for however long you'd like to stay," Walder Frey said after a few moments of silence. "I'm sure a man of your station has many other places to be." "I do," Maximus replied, "but I'll remain until this wedding's purpose is seen through. Wouldn't want any misunderstandings or accidents." Catelyn stepped forward, a sense of relief washing over her. Though they had been careful not to speak openly of it, she and Ned had shared suspicions about Lord Frey's loyalty. The old man was clever but long-winded. When that music began playing, she feared the very worst was about to happen. Arya nudged Sansa and whispered, "I thought he wouldn't come." Sansa shushed her sister before whispering back, "So did I. But now everyone will think the Starks have even more support than before." Hera and 5 other Imperial guards, all Valkyries led by Brunhilde, had landed behind him. Maximus gestured to Hela. "Allow me to introduce one of my wives, Hela, and these other 5 behind me are my Imperial guards." Hela approached the balcony's edge while Brunhilde and the rest of her guards stayed behind with Maximus. She gazed down at the gathering and gave an ironic smile. "I see the Starks are not the only ones who like to keep a close family." Some of the lords chuckled nervously, knowing full well that such a statement meant more than it suggested. "I promise we won't take up too much time now that we're here," Maximus said. "Enjoy the night's festivities while they last." With that, they moved back into the hall, several lords offering their seats to Maximus and Hela. The Asgardians spread out in several corners of the room, watching over all the people gathered. If anything happened, they could reach Maximus within a second before any harm came to him. Once everybody found their seats, Maximus gazed at Lord Walder Frey. "Now, please continue your little speech. I believe your last word was read. So why don't you continue what you were saying?" He smirked as he took a sip from a cup of wine that one of the Frey's daughters had poured for him. "I was just gonna say, enjoy this beautiful red evening in which we honor the marriage between His Grace and my daughter." He had to quickly come up with a lie, or else he didn't know what would happen. Maybe his castle would be burned down, his entire house, or just him. Maximus took another sip of the wine before placing it back onto the table. "I will only say this one, Lord Frey." Maximus stood up as his expression turned serious, and the lords within the room felt a sudden pressure. "You have but one choice. Get on your hands and knees right now and beg that I won't feed you to my wyverns for conspiring with the Lannisters." Gasps filled the room, and all eyes turned to Lord Walder Frey. He stood, mouth slightly open, hands trembling as he didn't really have a choice in the matter. He stood up from his seat and got onto his knees in front of all to see. His kin watched in horror, some stepping forward, unsure whether to follow him or die where they stood. Catelyn Stark held her breath, surprised that Lord Frey would conspire during a wedding. Robb turned to Maximus with a questioning look. "He conspired with them?" he asked. Maximus nodded. "But," he said, "even snakes can be useful." Lord Walder knelt, angry but more frightened than anything else. "Your Excellency," he said, "please forgive an old man for—" Hela interrupted him. "For treachery? For plotting? For having no spine? Old men are known for their foolishness," Maximus said, "and their attachment to old enemies." His gaze moved across the room as he spoke, settling on Roose Bolton at the far table. "They remember their place once shown a kinder way." Roose Bolton met his eyes, stone-faced. The Freys were shamed, but they were not fools. If Maximus knew what they had planned, then there was no possible way that they could do anything now. Robb would be on guard for the rest of the evening. They had gathered their forces outside, and there were dragons flying above them. He mustered all the dignity he could and gave a nod which was more than sufficient to spare him one way or another. "Then I will show a kinder way," Walder Frey said loudly, "and take this gift not as weakness, but as mercy." Maximus sat back down and poured himself more wine. To him, this was nothing more than a distraction that he could have handled without even being present. But where was the fun in that? It gave him a chance to see the Stark family and see how the twins looked in person compared to through a screen. He then turned to Robb and said out loud, "Though the fault lies with you, young Stark, for your nightly adulterous adventures with another lady before you even got married." Robb's face turned red as the lords all looked at each other. Some of them knew already, but now it was out in the open for everybody to hear. Arya and Sansa looked at their older brother with wide eyes. Ned lowered his head slightly. Maximus didn't just want to put the Freys in their place, but also revealed that Robb's actions were the cause to this. Unfortunately, this would put a stain on his relationship with his now wife Rosalind Frey. Despite the tension and harsh words, the rest of the night's feast progressed without incident. Maximus had made his point to the lords gathered and put Lord Frey in his place. The following day, guests and banners began to depart from the twins. The war against the Lannisters was about to continue as they would push further into the Westerlands and eventually the Crownlands. Littlefinger, who was somewhere in the other castle hiding until the massacre was over, had his room stormed. Imperial guards had stormed the room and dragged him out secretly in chains, removing a piece on the board from the Lannisters. When the news of Lord Frey's submission reached Tywin Lannister in his war camp outside Harrenhal, Tywin was furious. "The man is a slippery weasel," Kevin said, standing beside him. "Slippery enough," Tywin growled. To avoid paying for what he did, his plans were thwarted, and the only thing he could do now was fight them out with swords. It would cost him dearly since they were backed by Imperial support. Meanwhile, in Winterfell, everything was going smoothly after the attack by the Ironborn. The Ironborn, led by the traitor Theon, was captured by Shadowhand agents as they stormed the castle. They were thrown into the dungeons by the acting Lord of Winterfell and Prince Bran Stark. Counseled by Maester Luwin, the Ironborn attackers were kept as prisoners and a reminder. But the Ironborn were successful in other places such as Deepwood Motte, Torrhen Square, and Ashmark. They had sent raiding parties elsewhere while they stalled the northern forces at Winterfell. However, most of these raids were against unsupported or lightly defended areas since all the northern banners had joined Robb in his war against the Lannisters. Chapter 83 Prince Oberyn's Visit to Highgarden. Far north of the Wall, the Vikings that Maximus had sent to keep tabs on the movements of the Night King and help the people across the Wall had built a small town filled with about 10,000 freefolk people. The town was called New Valhalla, and it served as an imperial outpost for north of the Wall. The first groups who came in contact with the town were skeptical but soon realized that they were treated much better than they had been by their own people. Despite how the Night's Watch perceived the freefolk, most of them were just average people trying to survive in the intense cold. They were provided with food, shelter, and even weapons. Some of the freefolk began joining the defensive force for New Valhalla, becoming scouts, fighters, and eventually citizens once they made their contributions. As word spread, more people migrated towards New Valhalla in hopes of joining something greater. The Viking axemen who were dispatched had done an excellent job in not only keeping tabs on everything that was going on but also creating a good relationship with the freefolk. From what they could tell regarding the Night King's movements, he was much more cautious compared to his previous incarnation. Meanwhile, at Castle Black, Jon Snow watched Samwell struggle with his sword training. Their hands were numb from the cold, and their breath was visible as they dueled in the freezing air. "Come on, Sam," Jon said as he parried another clumsy strike. "Just keep your guard up. They can't walk over you if you stand tall." Sam huffed and swung awkwardly. "I'm not winning any fights standing tall or otherwise," he muttered as he took a swing at Jon to miss entirely as he fell forward while trying to regain his balance. Jon shrugged and smiled. "I've seen you shoot a crossbow better than any other recruit." Sam straightened, rubbing the back of his neck. "A crossbow's easier to aim," he said, "and doesn't have a habit of swinging back at me." Raising a brow, Jon saw Maester Aemon and two men in Night Watch black robes passing by them. One was Ser Alliser Thorne, and the other was Janos Slynt. The two of them had just returned for their journey south where they had tried to convince people of the White Walkers and the threat they posed to the realm. They were mostly unsuccessful due to the politics in King's Landing. "Lord Snow and Lord Tarly hard at work, I see," shouted Alliser as he passed by. "They should clean out their chambers before making a mockery of themselves," added Janos with a smirk. Sam looked away, embarrassed. He knew that, even if he wasn't good at training with swords, he was still better off most of the recruits and even better off some of the veterans. He was such an awkward man that others didn't know how to take him except putting him down. Once they were gone, Jon muttered something under his breath about the both of them before turning back to Sam. Jon handed Sam his sword back and patted him on the shoulder. "Ignore them," he said. "They're not half as brave as you were the day we crossed beyond the Wall." Sam gave him a faint smile, then looked up toward the battlements. "You think the people in King's Landing will ever believe it? What we saw out there?" he asked. "The Night King's real and he's coming. Doesn't matter how much gold they count or what thrones they sit on." Jon nodded. "They'll believe it when it's too late." In the dungeons of the Red Keep, Littlefinger sat chained, staring at the wall in silence. He'd been through worse, but this time it felt different. No guards joked near him, no whispers of a plan, just silence and the slow drip of water. "Such a shame," said Varys, appearing from the shadows, torch in hand. "You always were 3 steps ahead. Until you weren't." Littlefinger lifted his eyes slowly. "I underestimated the dragons." "You underestimated the future," Varys corrected. "And the future wears Imperial armor now." Littlefinger smirked despite the chains. "You think Maximus will be any different? Power corrupts, my friend. Even those who come bearing fire and mercy." Varys approached his cell. "Perhaps. But unlike you, he doesn't smile while he cuts throats." With that, Varys turned and walked away. In Highgarden, Lord Tyrell had gathered another army of 20,000 soldiers to counter the 40,000 soldiers that Stannis had gathered. Obviously, 40 beats 20, but when you are defending a castle, the 20,000 soldiers will have an advantage over the 40,000. Renly was once considered the best contender to take the throne, but after losing his army, he is dead last in the race. He hoped that Prince Oberyn, who had just arrived in Highgarden, could be convinced to help them in their battle against Stannis. Prince Oberyn was already given special permission from Maximus to create an alliance either through marriage or other means with House Martell. In the grand dining hall of Highgarden, Renly watched the entrance impatiently. Lords gathered around him, but Renly's eyes were fixed on the doors, waiting for Prince Oberyn's arrival. When they opened, Oberyn Martell strolled in, flanked by 2 of his daughters, Obara and Nymeria. Renly forced a smile onto his face, waving off his company. Prince Oberyn, he called out as though greeting an old friend. Oberyn approached with a smile on his face. King Renly, he said, not referring to him as your grace as there was already somebody higher than a king whom he served. Renly gestured toward an empty chair. We have much to discuss. Once seated, Oberyn took a sip from the goblet laid out for him. He tilted his head slightly, glancing around at the Reach lords who pretended not to eavesdrop. You asked for my presence, Oberyn said. What would you have of me? Renly leaned forward. Your support, he declared plainly. Oberyn exchanged looks with Obara and Nymeria, then let the silence linger before responding. Our support was given the moment Artys Arryn took Aegon's hand, Oberyn replied. The Reach is not part of that union. Renly gritted his teeth but kept calm. But it could be a marriage alliance. Your family has a history with mine. Oberyn shrugged, sipping his wine again. We also have a history being murdered by yours. Renly sighed, trying to mask his desperation. Stannis is gaining ground faster than anyone anticipated. And you are losing it, countered Oberyn. Not if I have Dorne and the Reach combined. Renly said boldly, his voice rising as he got frustrated. Oberyn was quiet, then finally spoke. And how would this look from the Imperial Court? Renly blinked in surprise. He hadn't considered what Oberyn meant by that statement. You want us to betray more than our tradition of loyalty, Oberyn continued slowly, and claim independence with you for a crown you might not hold. The Martells are many things, King Renly, but fools we are not. Renly's fingers tapped rhythmically on the table as he thought about how to convince them without angering them. If Stannis wins, said Renly, then he'll have 2 kingdoms to crush. Oberyn stood up, placing his goblet down with a pause. Or none, if the Empire gets involved themselves. As Oberyn turned to leave the dining hall, the doors opened once again, this time revealing Lord Mace Tyrell and the Queen of Thorns, Lady Olenna. Mace puffed up proudly, moving forward with the confidence of a man who believed he still had control over his house's destiny. Olenna followed at a slower pace, her sharp eyes immediately scanning Oberyn. Prince Oberyn, Mace greeted with a bow. We're honored by your presence here in Highgarden. I'm certain you are, Oberyn said, nodding politely but not bowing. Lady Olenna stepped in front of her son. Let's not pretend we're here to stroke egos. You came for clarity, not courtesy, she said bluntly. And I suspect you have more to say than what you offered Renly. Obara and Nymeria stood back, watching the exchange silently. Oberyn gave a slight bow to Olenna, genuine though barely. You're correct, Lady Olenna, he said. I came to speak with the true decision-makers of House Tyrell. Mace blinked. But Olenna raised a hand, cutting him off. Walk with us, Prince Oberyn, she said, motioning toward a side hallway. The 3 left the hall, as they moved deeper into the quiet corridors of Highgarden. Once they were out of earshot, Olenna spoke plainly. You want to unbind Margaery from Renly. Oberyn gave a slow nod. And bind her to someone far more capable of changing this realm's fate. Mace frowned. Maximus. Olenna gave him a sidelong look, then turned back to Oberyn. You came to gauge if we'd go along with it. I came to offer something better, Oberyn said. Margaery Tyrell as one of his queens. The Empire does not lack beauty, but it does lack sufficient ties to Westerosi nobility. That bond must be forged in numerous places. Why not add the Reach to that? Mace looked unconvinced. Renly is still our best chance to reclaim the throne from Joffrey. Oberyn tilted his head. Is he? With no army and a marriage that makes him more liability than leader. Lady Olenna spoke before Mace could respond. You're not wrong. Renly is charming but unfit. Still, we don't break betrothals lightly. The Reach thrives on appearance. The High Septon has already blessed the match. The Empire is not the faith, Oberyn replied. Maximus does not need blessings to win wars. He commands dragons, and men who would die simply because he asked. Olenna studied Oberyn carefully. How has Arianne been treated since her marriage to the Emperor? Better than any lord or lady in Westeros, Oberyn admitted. She can't keep quiet about how much she is loved by not just the Emperor, but also the rest of the Imperial harem. But it's not about Dorne. This is about unity. Dorne and the Vale have already joined the Empire. The North can be called an ally. Even the Riverlands are wavering. What the Empire lacks is enough legitimacy through legacy. In addition to our house, House Tyrell offers that. Olenna was quiet for a moment. And what of Marjorie? Does Maximus even know her? He's aware of her. I would not come with this offer if he had not signaled openness to it. Oberyn leaned forward slightly. She would be treated well, respected, protected. He is no Joffrey. Mace shifted. You'd have us betray Renly. Olenna turned to her son. We'd have us survive, Mace. Perhaps even rise higher than we ever imagined. Oberyn gave her a smile. If you agree, I can deliver the message to Maximus myself. The Emperor doesn't play games with small men, but he listens to alliances that move the board. Olenna nodded slowly, considering every angle. You'll have our answer by the week's end. We'll see how Renly responds when the tides rise. And if he resists? Oberyn asked. She smirked. Then he'll have the wedding annulled for, shall we say, unmet expectations? Oberyn chuckled and bowed slightly. I'll await your raven. As he turned to leave, Olenna placed a hand on Mace's arm. The continent is heading a different direction, and no king on this continent can stop what's coming. Oberyn left, taking his daughters and escorts back to Dornish land. But a few days after leaving Highgarden, they were surrounded by soldiers bearing the flag of Stannis Baratheon. Chapter 84 King of Nothing. Surrounding Oberyn and his escorts were the soldiers of Stannis Baratheon. Having been tipped off by one of Stannis' spies in Highgarden, he was told about the meeting and wanted to use this opportunity to force House Martell to stay out of the war. From his understanding, Dorne was part of the Imperial Union, but not officially, as they were like an autonomous region that ruled themselves. He planned to use Oberyn as a hostage to force the Imperial Union and Dorne to stay out of the war so that he could claim the Iron Throne, which was rightfully his. He had already been preparing for a conflict with the Imperial Union and had researched several ways that dragons could be dealt with and how they were dealt with in the past. He had some of the Sellsword companies that he hired, prepared special equipment such scorpions, poison-tipped crossbows and bows which could weaken a dragon. For some time, he had prepared these weapons and saved them for special use against the dragons. He heard the Imperial Union had hundreds of dragons, even thousands, but he didn't know how true this was. Spies sent to the Imperial Union territory never made it back, and merchants and other travelers never gave a good estimate. So, he and his commanders opted to just consider that they had at least 200 dragons, at most 400. They prepared nearly 150 scorpions and made thousands of poison arrows that can be used against the dragons. Other equipment such as trebuchets would also be used. The group of soldiers surrounded Oberyn and his daughters, whom he ordered to surrender. This was their plan from the moment he left Dorne. Maximus knew that Stannis would try to capitalize on this and had ordered the Shadowhand to kill Stannis' spies in Highgarden and send a letter prompting him to make a move on Oberyn. Stannis fell for this all too easy, and soon enough, he would become yet another piece removed from the board. He hoped that, with Oberyn as a hostage, it would force House Martell to stay out of the war. Even if they did get involved, by the time they could do anything, it would be too late, and he would have claimed the Iron Throne. And if not, then he still had a plan to deal with them. Lots of unknowns for Stannis, but many things he had accounted for as well. Risky, yes, but who didn't take risks in this game? Arriving at Storm's End a few days later, Oberyn, his daughters, and the guards that accompany him were placed into rooms under guard. Not prisoners, but not free either. Nymeria scowled as she looked out one of the tower's windows. We should have killed them all, she said bitterly. Oberyn sighed as he landed on the bed with his hands behind his head. It wouldn't have changed much, he said. I thought when some of them drew swords on us, you'd have actually challenged me to see who could kill more. Obara retorted. He thinks he can keep us like dogs on a chain, like he kept Marjorie. Oberyn laughed. Stannis would have more luck chaining the wind. Nymeria turned back from the window. Shouldn't we do something? We are, Oberyn replied. We're waiting. Hours later, Stannis met with Oberyn inside his chamber. The guards opened the door and let him in, then posted outside, swords at the ready. Oberyn stretched his arms and stood up. I assume you've come to give me a horse and an apology, Oberyn said. Stannis didn't flinch at the sarcasm. You'll leave soon enough, he said, but not until I'm certain Dorne won't intervene. Oberyn smiled as if amused by how little Stannis knew the situation. Dorne has already intervened, my dear Baratheon, he replied. You mean your meeting with Renly? He's of no use to us now. What about your meeting with Lady Tyrell? Stannis asked sharply. Oberyn tilted his head slightly. More use than you, it seems. Stannis had already heard from his spies about this union. He knew that Maximus and the Empire were making their move, which was why he had to act fast. "I know you're aligned with the Imperial Union," Stannis said, "but that can change as quickly as a raven fly. So, I'll ask you once. Will Dorne set aside a continent's squabbles if it means peace with the new king?" Oberyn approached him with his arms crossed and a grin on his face. "What are you offering?" Renly made the same proposal, yet here we are in your dungeon. Renly offered dreams. "I offer certainty," Stannis declared. "A king's word. Once I have the throne, House Martell will be rewarded as they should have been long ago." "Words come easy to those who want something," Oberyn said. "And easy promises are just as easily broken." There was nothing Stannis could offer them that the Imperial Union wouldn't already provide for them. Just after a few months, Dorne was filled with trade and things were improving significantly for the common people, increasing House Martell's popularity among not just the common people, but the nobles as well. The two bickered back and forth, with Oberyn simply playing mind tricks on Stannis. Stannis was not at all pleased with this and left, not able to convince Oberyn to see a different path. After this, he sent a raven to Sunspear, informing Prince Doran that he has his brother, and requesting them to stay out of his affairs. He also sent a raven to Heaven's Reach, warning the Imperial Union to not interfere. Almost a week later, the news had reached Maximus, who already knew about this plan. Arianne walked into his office where she saw the other members of the Imperial Harem and the members of the High Council sitting down. "Is that the letter?" Maximus asked, referring to the piece of paper in her hand. She nodded her head and handed the letter to Olerin, who read it out loud. "Emperor Maximus, I have Prince Oberyn and his bastard daughters in my custody. They will not be released until I am assured Dorne and the Empire does not interfere in Westeros's affairs. My claim to the Iron Throne is just, if you seek war, you will find it. Stannis of House Baratheon, true king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men." His voice trailed off as he smirked at the last line. Everyone else in the room grinned at just how bold Stannis was. Ianwe practically burst out laughing, not able to contain his laughter. "I haven't laughed like this in a while. Perhaps we could spare this petty king and use him as a court jester of sorts." The rest of the room laughed, as it would be quite amusing to see Stannis dressed in a clown suit and forced to tell jokes. Stannis thought that by capturing Oberyn, it would force them to stay out of the conflict. "Since he wants a war so badly," Maximus stated, "let's give him one." Hela looked excited at the declaration, as she had been waiting for some action ever since they went to Qarth and took care of Jaehaerys. She didn't expect it to happen so early, but was more than happy to thrust herself into another conflict along with Lilith, who was getting bored sitting around. "We'll make a formal announcement in a week. In the meantime, prepare 5 legions to send across the sea. 1 will go to Dragonstone to claim the island and the place where Stannis resides. Another will take the island of Tarth and prepare for an invasion of the Stormlands, while the remaining 3 will arrive at Sunspear and prepare to march to war with Dorne against Stannis." This was just the start. Now that he was going into Westeros, he wanted to secure as much alliances as he can. A week later, a formal announcement was made. The Imperial Union declared that Stannis and any lord sworn to him are now their enemies, and they would rescue Prince Oberyn and his daughters, alongside Margaery Tyrell, from the tyranny of Stannis Baratheon, who was now called the King of Nothing. As the war began in the south, the war in the north continued to intensify between the Lannisters and the Starks alongside their allies as they marched further into the Westerlands, burning and pillaging. Letting them have their way with his land like that angered Tywin more than he thought possible. He moved faster than any of his bannermen expected. Some even doubted his age would let him ride so hard. He left Harrenhal and ordered Gregor Clegane to raid the Riverlands while he marched west with his entire force. Robb knew that if Tywin was focused on them and not Stannis, then they have already won a manageable victory. With the power of the reports and Shadowhand agents, Robb was steps ahead of every movement that Tywin made. By the time Tywin's army arrived at Oxcross, they found nothing but burned fields and ruined supplies. The Stark's forces were far ahead, raiding Silverhill and Crakehall, while Tywin chased rumors of their actual movements. Once Tywin realized just how big of a grip the Imperials had on everything, he knew that he couldn't risk attacking Renly or Stannis until Robb Stark's men were dealt with. He changed his tactics, pulling west to regroup at Lannisport. This gave hope to Stannis supporters who believed they now had a chance to take King's Landing without much resistance. However, with the announcement from the Imperial Union, some doubted that they would be able to take King's Landing and hold the Stormlands against the Imperial invasion which they knew were coming. A few days after the Imperial announcement, and the Imperial Navy had already locked down the narrow sea, performing checks on every ship that passed through. It didn't matter if you were a well-known merchant or not. If the Imperials said they were checking your belongings, then there was nothing you could do but nod your head. Legions had begun to arrive in Dorne, while the Dornish still gathered their army, which was to be led by Prince Doran himself. The legion that was supposed to attack the island of Tarth was preparing for its naval invasion from Lys. They would be aided by 20 Wyvern riders and 200 members of the Dragon Knights. Everybody throughout Imperial land began to speak about the Stannis, the King of Nothing. Plays were put on showcasing Maximus dragging him through the streets while he shouted about being the true king. Children played jokes on each other saying, "Now you're Stannis." Everybody in the Imperial army was prepared for war. Once Maximus announced their conflict with Stannis, many rejoiced and claimed that he would finally bring peace to the continent as he did with Essos. For Cersei, it was her worst nightmare. The one thing she didn't want the most was happening, and there was nothing she could do about it. Chapter 85 Fall of Storm's End. With the assistance of the 20 Wyverns and 200 Dragon Knights, the island of Tarth had fallen within a day. The lord of the island, Lord Selwyn Tarth, had surrendered almost immediately the moment the Wyverns started causing chaos within the castle. All of the defenses against the Wyverns had been sent to Storm's End to prepare for the war with the Imperials, leaving Lord Tarth with nothing to defend against the Wyverns. The Wyvern riders had caused the defending soldiers to flee and find cover, but several hundred of them were burned before the rest gave up. Kneeling in front of Commander Edric of the Imperial Legion, Lord Tarth was pleading for his life. "Mercy, my lord," he said. "The Empire is glorious and strong. Forgive my defiance, and I will swear myself to you fully." Edric looked down at him. "We care nothing for oaths from fearful man," he replied. "Your life is not mine to give. You surrender to the Emperor, not to me." Lord Tarth nodded vigorously, eager to save his skin. "Then I'll accompany you, whatever you wish. Edric cut him off. "Get on your horse," he stated as Lord Tarth followed him willingly. The Imperial forces had secured the island, and the Imperial Navy had created a blockade to prevent enemy forces from landing. The news of Tarth's fall spread like wildfire, leaving Stannis' supporters wary and unsure of what would happen next. Everywhere from Windwater Bridge to Rainwood had heard about the defeat. Stannis sat alone in his chamber at Storm's End with a map spread before him. He had heard rumors that half his bannermen were ready to abandon him for little more than making sure they were not wiped out by an overwhelming force. "Will they stay?" he muttered to himself as he peered at the tiny figures representing his army on the map. "Or run with their tails between their legs?" He knew that even with Oberyn as his hostage, Dorne was not going to let this incident slip. Instead, it was spread throughout the land that Dornish troops were gathering at Sunspear alongside tens of thousands of Imperial troops to march on the Stormlands from the south. Stannis had a total of about 50,000 soldiers under him and dozens of lords. All he needed to do was defend Storm's End when they attack, and then show the continent that the Imperials are nothing to be feared. Unlike when Aegon invaded with his dragons, they were prepared this time. Or at least that's what they thought. But the weapons that they had would be of no use against the Wyverns of the Imperial Union. Having heard of the Imperial Union involvement, House Tyrell broke the marriage between Renly and Margaery and sent a raven to Heaven's Reach requesting Margaery enter the Imperial harem. In exchange, the Reach and House Tyrell would bow their heads to Imperial Union. After a brutal struggle with his Rainbow Guard, Renly was thrown in a cell after House Tyrell's betrayal. After a few days passed, Maximus had arrived in Highgarden, welcomed by a host of Tyrell soldiers and lords. Instead of riding on Nyxera, he rode on a griffin escorted by the 10 Griffin Knights and 5 Wyverns. His meeting with Lady Olenna lasted only 10 minutes. She had expected negotiation, perhaps even anger. But as it turned out, nothing pleased Maximus more than seeing those who thought themselves clever prove they could be practical as well. "You run your house as well as I expected," he said. "Better than some run a kingdom." Olenna smirked. "I see why Arianne is quite taken with you. With Margaery at my side," he continued, "House Tyrell will flourish. The Reach will remain strong. Stronger than if it held the Iron Throne itself." "Perhaps," Olenna replied, "but strength is all we've ever cared for. I have your word she'll be more than another gem in your lovely crown." Maximus nodded. "You have my word and more." Mace Tyrell watched from a distance, nervous but eager as Maximus departed Highgarden and headed to Storm's End. The two sides had reached an agreement, and now that Margaery was betrothed to him, her safety was now considered a top priority and needed to be resolved quickly. So, using dozens of airships, the entire Dornish army and the 3 Imperial legions were transported to the Imperial siege camp, set up outside of Storm's End. This happened over the course of 10 days and was the fastest any army in Westeros had been able to travel with so many soldiers. Within the camp, Maximus had gathered the commanders of the 3 legions, the Dornish army, and his own commanders, which consisted of Eonwy and Hela. Maximus started off the meeting. This battle will be the end for Stannis and all those who serve him. Having threatened the Imperial Union and keeping Prince Doran and his daughters as hostages, there will be no mercy for this worthless and weak king. Hela clenched her fists in anticipation. They were finally going to fight. Purge the castle. Let's leave Nona live, she said, emphasizing her eagerness. I'll lead the ground assault and kick off this battle by breaking the walls of the castle, Maximus replied. Once the enemy is filled with fear and staggered from my attack, then the rest of you will lead the soldiers and finish off anybody who resists. Maximus stood up and looked around the room with a scary expression. Anybody who rapes or pillages the castle will be dealt with accordingly by the imperial laws of war. Is that understood? Everybody present nodded their heads. The legion commanders had these laws drilled into their head during their training. It outlined that no imperial soldier shall rape or pillage enemy cities during times of war. The punishment was immediate execution no matter your status or reasoning. The other laws outlined prisoners of war, surrendering enemies, and a number of other things. Stannis believed that he was prepared for the imperial invasion by having hundreds of weapons specifically built to counter dragons and wyverns. But with airships joining the battle, his chances of survival were near 0%. They were going to put on a show that all of Westeros would remember. The night passed, and soon enough the sun started to rise above the horizon. Inside Storm's End, Stannis had just received word that House Tyrell broke their alliance with Renly and joined Maximus. This came as a devastating blow because he thought that they would at least be occupied long enough to deal with Maximus and eventually beat him back to Essos. With this news coming in right before the battle was set to begin, he knew this was going to be his hardest battle yet. But knowing Stannis and his stubbornness, he wouldn't retreat or give up until he died or won. The sun had risen over the battlefield as the Imperial and Dornish army lined up in front of the castle. Maximus stood in the front and planted his sword in the ground while looking at Stannis, who stood atop the castle walls. Gazing down from the walls at the lines of soldiers standing in front of him, Stannis narrowed his eyes. They stretched across the fields in perfect formation, the banners of Dorne fluttering beside the Imperial banner. He turned to his commanders, each of them aware that the sheer numbers out there were overwhelming. They think they'll walk through us without breaking a sweat, he said. We'll show them what it means to bleed. His words were met with determined nods, but doubt lingered in many eyes. Hela stepped forward with her sword in hand. She could see the defenses set up along the walls of Storm's End and grinned. There was nothing she liked more than smashing things apart, especially when those being smashed thought they actually stood a chance. Taking his sword out of the ground, Maximus reached the wall in less than a second, creating a massive hole through a part of the wall. The soldiers who were at the top were either thrown off the wall or had fallen straight down with the debris. With this, Hela and the other commanders issued the order and the attack began. Wyverns flew overhead and started to lay waste to the castle's defenders. The Imperial ships just off the shore began to open fire on the castle as well, creating chaos amongst the defenders. The initial attack had already demoralized the soldiers on the walls, and now they were being burned alive by wyverns and attacked from the sea. What could they do except fight and die or surrender? Maximus, after breaking through the wall, had begun his own slaughter of Stannis' soldiers, slowly making his way to where Stannis was trying to command his soldiers. Joining him were the Imperial Guard who had caught up to him. They immediately got to work and started to finish off any soldiers that Maximus skipped or left for them. Prince Doran had the look of a man satisfied not just with Stannis' predicament, but at the complete lack of mercy shown to those who followed him. The Imperials are feared and respected, but from the stories he heard about Maximus, he knew that he was also unforgiving to his enemies. Behind Prince Doran, the Dornish soldiers dug in at the breached wall, holding it against anyone trying to break the lines. They shouted in defiance as they ran their spears through Stannis' soldiers, not losing a single step or letting a single one slip through. The battlefield was filled with cries and clashes of steel as the wyverns flew overhead. The Imperial legions combined with the Dornishmen cut through the defenders like butter. "Press them harder," shouted Hela. "Your king is nothing," she taunted Stannis' men as she cut one down after another, all while laughing. The women were horrified as they saw her rip men apart while jesting about how weak they were and how much they screamed. Stannis was retreating toward the keep when he heard a commotion. From the shadows of the lower walls came Prince Oberyn, followed by his daughters and 9 very dead guards in their wake. Oberyn had a sword in hand and used it well, cutting down anyone in range as he advanced toward Stannis. "Is this what a man does for his crown?" Oberyn taunted. "You're worse than Robert." His words reached Stannis, who turned around to reply. "It's what I'll do to win," Stannis replied. He stood firm as the battle went on around him. Maximus reached the top of the tower just above the courtyard and looked down. Stannis stood proudly, yet he was alone. His knights were long dead or fled. With a single motion, Maximus leapt to the courtyard, landing behind Stannis. Beside them, the Imperial Guards cut down the last of the soldiers protecting him. The rest of the castle had been swept by Dornish and Imperial soldiers with hardly any losses. Huge sections of it burned brightly. From all sides, soldiers knelt in surrender. One of the Legion commanders approached Maximus and looked back at a defiant Stannis before speaking. "Your Excellency," he said loudly enough for Stannis to hear, "the king has no crown." Maximus turned his attention to Stannis, who raised his sword ready for his final battle. "You're a demon," he declared as he looked at Maximus. Maximus looked up and saw the Valkyries descending toward him. Brunhilde stepped off her mount and kneeled in front of Maximus. "The city is yours, Your Excellency," she stated. "Very good," he said, motioning for her to stand up. "Now all that's left is to take out the garbage. In fact, Brunhilde, I want you to fight this man." Brunhilde nodded and turned to face Stannis. She smiled as she raised her sword. "You're done," she said. Stannis stepped back, eyes burning with fury. "I'll never." Brunhilde moved faster than he thought possible. Her blade struck his effortlessly, sending it flying from his hands and clattering loudly against the courtyard. As the sounds of fires burned around them, they watched in silence as the defeated king fell to his knees, knowing he was the king of nothing. Maximus gazed around at the bodies scattered across the castle walls and courtyard. "Deliver him to the Tyrells," he said dismissively. Brunhilde turned and smirked as they moved to tie Stannis up like a common bandit. The battle was over quicker than anyone could have anticipated. The entire castle was taken in less than an hour. In fact, it wasn't even fair to call it a battle because this was something entirely different, a massacre. The speed and ferocity with which the castle was taken shocked all those who saw it or heard about it. There were over 50,000 soldiers defending Storm's End for Stannis Baratheon, and they were wiped out almost instantly. The old lords who didn't die on the battlefield immediately declared fealty to Maximus, swearing that they served only because Stannis forced them. Meanwhile, with Storm's End taken, the rest of the Stormlands would follow suit. Maximus didn't know what he planned to do with this region yet. Whether to keep it the same or change how it was ruled was something that he would think about and decide at a later date.